Amazing.
Shortly after Rick Scott was elected in 2010 and was inaugurated at the beginning of the next year, 2011, the General Counsel's office called a staff meeting with all the lawyers to warn us that things were going to change under the new administration. And within those changes were certain policies that would prohibit us from using these terms: climate change, global warming, sustainability, and even sea level rise.
Very interesting that you thought the best way to save South Florida was to just cut it off.
Well, let me start at the beginning.
Who's that? Who's that?
That's me. The baby. I more or less grew up in Florida. Long story short, I'm an American Army brat. The only consistent home address in my life has been that of my maternal grandparents in Orlando. So lucky me. I got to spend my summers here, from sun-soaked childhood to stoned adolescence, each year returning back to civilization in London. Eventually, my nationality caught up with me, and due to new immigration restrictions in the UK, I was forced to move back in with my parents in Pompano Beach.
South Florida, as we know it, could be washed away by rising seas. That's according to a new study out this week. But is there anything that can be done to stop it?
In October 2014, the City of South Miami's Vice Mayor, Walter Harris, wrote a resolution proposing that the state of Florida be split in two: North Florida and South Florida, with the division line being the South Florida Water Management District in Orlando. My street is on one of the over 500 canals in this area. A sort of less romantic Venice, if you will. No one is really from Florida here, but some of my neighbors have been here for a considerable amount of time.
My name is Gary Galbraith. Live in Florida I've been in this house in Florida the last 42 years, but I moved to Florida in 1969. I was on the west coast of Florida at a time when there were extreme low tides. There were thousands of live mollusks, and I got involved into shell collecting, got me involved with the Broward Shell Club, which I was president a couple years in the 70s. When I started diving, I used to go down to Dania Beach. First reef now is actually the second reef, because the true first reef has been buried from not just sandstorms, but a lot of the reclamation projects they do to refurnish the beach. They've pretty much covered that up and destroyed it. One of the areas we dove a lot as a shell collector, again, I'm talking, this is specimen shells, not dead beach stuff. And when we were diving, the sewer pipes go through the reef. They dug the trenches, laid in the pipes, and you know, these big mounds of coral rock that had been dug up and piled next to it. They went up to about 45 feet, came down to about 65 or 70 where we were diving. And basically what we would do, you turn a rock over, you check under it, put it back in place so you don't kill the life under it. When I don't know if I should call it a fad or what, when people started collecting live rocks for aquariums and selling them to the aquarium places, they basically wiped out that whole area, just took the rocks, sold them, and I understand where I used to dive that was 45 to 70 is now just flat. That means everything that lived under every rock has been killed and gone. Having the knowledge doesn't stop people from doing some things. There's lots of talk about the water rising. I see when we have 4 times a year, we have our extreme high tides. And now they come up to, well, I haven't got much of a backyard here. It's, you know, house is pretty close to the water, but it comes about 8 feet, 10 feet into the grass on the extreme tides now. It didn't do that before.
My expulsion coinciding with a shift in global politics to the right. My new permanent home. Cheap and cheerful. Business as usual. Never mind sea level rise. I mean, nuisance flooding. When I was just a visitor here, my Floridian friends would take me on outdoor excursions.
Yeah. This is supposed to be January.
It's been cold. For like 2 days.
Fucking hot today.
So enthralled with nature, yet alienated from the politics that would decide the fate of this narrow strip of land. Most people don't really care what happens to the planet after their own lifetime.
What the fuck are y'all doing exactly? Let's go.
But the few people, I mean, I just had it on the market a few weeks now, but 3 or 4 people that have come to look, nobody's even considered about the rise of it. I guess they figure it's not going to happen to them yet.
Say if carbon emissions are not put in check by the year 2100, the sea level could climb at least 14 feet, impacting about 20 million people living along the country's coastlines. One interactive map tool shows most of South Florida could be underwater sometime within the next 200 to 2,000 years.
It's a kitten. It's not a dog. You want me to introduce you to people?
Sure. I'm glad there's politicians out there like Walter. Hopefully he's got some valid suggestions for us.
Cassandra Longview?
Lockwood.
Lockwood.
It's okay.
Longview. Now let's talk about South Florida. South Florida has always been completely a different state than North Florida. Yeah, she's doing a documentary on the world in general and South Miami specifically and the 51st state universally. Right?
Yep.
Right. From 1950 on, there have been people saying we should separate. Initially, it was because we had a higher population, we made all the money, we completely different politically. Okay. You know the kitten?
No, I'm not.
Oh, you don't know the kitten?
There's a kitten down there.
This, by the way, is Oceana.
Right.
And she's taking a kitten, so life is good.
Oh, excellent. Congratulations on your new adoption.
Thank you.
In October of, I guess, 2015, I sponsored a resolution to separate North and South Florida because North Florida, the governor of the state, didn't even want to hear about climate change. Didn't believe in it. He said he's not a scientist. And the ones who did say they believed in it were mistaken probably. And he forbid his cabinet to even talk about it. And the kitten totally adopted her. It would not leave her.
Oh, no kidding.
It's amazing. So when I brought this up 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, I was under the impression by the end of the century it would rise between 1 and 2 feet. Well, since then, shortly after, within about 5 months afterwards, I found out by the middle of the century, by 2050, 2060, it's going to rise between 5 and 10 feet, which means there will be no South Florida. South Florida is 5 feet, or most of the areas by the coast are 5 feet or less above sea level. The rest of it is 10 to 15 feet above sea level. North Florida is anywhere from 50 to 150 feet above sea level. And a 10-foot rise in sea level literally will take out the entire South Florida, physically take it away. It'll become Atlantis.
No one really tried to save it. I imagine the waves crashing into the souvenir shop display windows, sucking porcelain dolphins and turtle snow globes into the ocean, reclaiming the bastardized representations of itself. So, Walter hadn't been the pillar of hope that I'd wanted. And Florida's definitely sinking into the ocean. But at least I got this sweet cat. Oshi. Oshi.